So let's dive into a question that's just fascinating, one that sits right at the intersection of ancient myths and some very modern fears. What if the superweapons you hear about in India's epic tales weren't just stories? What if they were something more? And that brings us to the big one. The question that's fueled so many books, so many shows, and probably a few late-night internet deep dives. Did ancient India actually have nuclear weapons? It's a massive claim, so let's really unpack it. The descriptions, the theories, and of course, the evidence.
Okay, so to even begin to answer that, we've got to go back to the source texts. We have to look at the descriptions of a weapon that, to a lot of people, sounds incredibly, almost eerily familiar. The Brahmastra.
The Mahabharata, which is one of India's foundational epics, is just packed with stories of these divine weapons, or astras. And look, these weren't your everyday swords and arrows. Nope, they were summoned through special chants, through mantras, and they could unleash powers that could completely change the course of a battle. And the most famous, the most powerful of them all was the Brahmastra. Now, this is a big one. You've probably seen this quote floating around the internet. It's incredibly evocative, right? It sounds almost exactly like what Oppenheimer said after seeing the first atomic test. What's really interesting, though, is that while this quote gets used all the time to draw that nuclear parallel, many scholars will tell you its exact origin and translation are actually up for debate. But even without that specific quote, the descriptions in the text itself are just as startling. When you dig into the Mahabharata, the descriptions of what the Brahmastra could do are, well, they're terrifying. The texts talk about a weapon unleashing this blinding light and a searing heat that literally scorched the earth, leaving it barren. It had enough power to make rivers and lakes just evaporate. But the effects weren't just environmental, they were biological too. Its power was said to linger, even harming unborn children. And this is key. It was a weapon of last resort. Only the most skilled, most worthy warriors could even think about using it. So you can totally see why people draw these parallels to our own modern weapons. But here's a crucial piece of the puzzle. To really get the full picture, you have to understand that the Brahmastra wasn't some kind of one-off super weapon. It was actually just one part of a whole system, a whole arsenal of divine weapons. And that gives us a much, much richer context for all of this. And this table here, it just gives you a little taste of that system. I mean, you had weapons like the Pashupatastra, which was said to be capable of destroying everything. But then you had others that were tied directly to the elements themselves. You had the Agnyastra, unleashing fire, or the Varunastra, causing these massive, world-ending floods. What this really points to is a worldview that's built on divine and cosmic power, not on physical technology. So, if these are ancient, mythological texts, where in the world did this literal, high-tech interpretation even come from? Well, it turns out the whole idea of ancient nukes is a lot more modern than you might think. This theory really didn't get going until the 20th century, long after these texts were written. It was kicked into high gear by authors like Erich von Däniken, who put forward this idea that maybe the ancient gods weren't gods at all, but aliens with advanced tech. Then you had writers like David Hatcher Childress who pushed this idea of a lost, super advanced human civilization. From there, the theory just exploded online, usually backed up by those dramatic quotes and these persistent but totally unproven claims about things like radioactive skeletons being found in ancient dig sites. Okay, this brings us right to the core of this whole thing. We've got the epic stories on one side, and we've got this modern theory on the other. So now, let's put those claims up against the hard, cold, scientific, and historical evidence. Let's do a reality check. So let's put these side by side. The claim is that all this talk of blinding light and scorched earth has to be proof of an atomic bomb. But the reality? That kind of language is actually a super common way for epic poems from all around the world to describe immense godlike power. It's poetic metaphor. And that other big claim that a place like Mohenjo-Daro shows signs of radiation? It's probably one of the most thoroughly debunked myths out there. Archaeologists and physicists have looked. There's just nothing there. Look, at the end of the day, for a theory this big, you need some kind of proof. And for the ancient nuke idea, the key pieces just aren't there.
There's zero archaeological evidence, no strange radiation readings, no cities turned to glass, no layers of nuclear fallout in the soil. And maybe even more important, there is no trace of the gigantic scientific and industrial machine you would need to build something like this. You have to remember what these epics were for. Their goal was to teach lessons about philosophy and morality, not to be some kind of scientific textbook.
Okay, so if the stories aren't about lost technology or ancient aliens, then what are they about? And this, for me, is where we find the real and honestly the much more powerful message hiding in these texts. See, in their original context, a divine astra was so much more than a weapon. It was a symbol of cosmic, universal power. And being able to wield one was really a test of your character. The stories aren't really about the bang, they're about the choice to cause the bang. They're these deep, incredible explorations of what happens when you have unchecked power, and why restraint, this idea of sanyam, is the ultimate virtue.
And there's this one moment in the Mahabharata that just perfectly captures this whole idea. It's a climax of the war. The hero, Arjuna, and his rival both fire a Brahmastra at each other. Realizing that two of these weapons going off will literally destroy the world, Arjuna is told by the gods to take his back. And he does. He retracts it. The focus of the story isn't on the awesome explosion, it's on the moral strength and the wisdom it takes to not use your ultimate weapon.
All right, let's just break it all down. The final verdict. Do these ancient texts describe weapons of incredible power? Yes, absolutely. In amazing detail. Was it a literal description of nuclear bombs? All the evidence says no. That's a modern idea read back into the text. Is there any physical scientific evidence of an ancient nuclear war? Nope, not a shred. But is there a deeper, more powerful lesson in these stories? 1,000% yes. A lesson about wisdom and the huge responsibility that comes with great power. Which leaves us with this one final thought, right? If these epic stories aren't really about atomic bombs in the past, maybe, just maybe, they're a kind of timeless warning for us, right here in our own nuclear age. A reminder that the greatest power isn't about unleashing destruction, it's about having the wisdom and the courage to hold it back. Thanks for joining me on The Explainer.